thanks. Yeah, so I'm Roger, I'm from Australia, full stack dev, and originally mechatronic engineer, so I went from C++ to more PHP, JavaScript, Python, that kind of stuff. So today I'm going to be talking about Lando. Lando is basically an environment to, basically a tool to set up local web development environments quickly. So I'm going to talk about why that's valuable and how Lando kind of solves problems around inefficient local development environment setup. So I'm sure you've all heard things like this before. It certainly depends a lot on the type of company you work for, or type of industry you're in. If you're in a startup and you're working on only one project in one team for a long period of time, you may only experience this once, like a small handful of times. But if you're on the other extreme of the industry, agencies, where you are building out web solutions for multiple other companies, sometimes you might be developing multiple projects within the same day, which you try to avoid for context switching reasons, but sometimes it happens. So I've heard all these things in my experience. This, of course, is the traditional one. It's got this certain tone to it, right? It's like, not my problem, right? Well, it works on my machine, so you must be incompetent, right? It's got that vibe to it, even if they don't say that. But I've definitely heard all these things, like, this thing, you forgot this thing, this global dependency is missing, no, it's still there, but it's the wrong version. That's in the README, but of course with README it's documentation, it's not code, and documentation can't fail a compile test, right? Code can. So what I'll be talking about later is Lando basically turns it into local development environments, infrastructure as code. So you also have these other problems whereby operating system is sensitivity. So if they're using a different operating system, it's not working on mine, it must be because you're using Windows, something like that. So this is kind of the problem which you see a lot in very kind of dynamic environments where people are working on a lot of projects at once, where people are switching between projects or moving to other teams, or whenever a new developer is hired, or a developer leaves and has to onboard someone else, things like that. So it's a big problem, and it has a lot of related overheads. So it's a pretty unpleasant induction experience for a new dev. So when they join and they're trying to just get started, and they can't even get it running, they have, it kind of makes them feel like, maybe I'm not very good at this, maybe I'm not as good at code as I thought, and it makes them feel kind of like they've just been thrown in the deep end. And the other thing is, when somebody's setting up kind of a project, whether it's a web app or a WordPress site, or setting up some microservices thing locally, well, they're going to not just be themselves not getting any productive work done, right? Not actually adding value to the project, but they're pulling two people off adding value to the project, and usually the other person is either the tech lead of the project or some other senior dev who knows more about it, and so really should be working on that productive thing rather than what is just a deadweight loss. You don't get any value from it when somebody's setting something up. And in general, it hurts morale. If people feel like everything is just so dysfunctional, it's so hard to get started on something, it makes them feel like they're not in a particularly productive environment. And as we all feel as devs, when a productive dev is a happy dev, right? A dev who's building new cool things is happy. A dev who's buried in technical debt is not so happy. So the rewards of fixing it is improved performance overall from everybody in the whole team. So you get this kind of harmony going where everybody feels like it's running like a well-oiled machine. You also get lower keyman risk. Now, I do like to say that keyman risk is no risk for the keyman, right? It's a risk for the company who employs him. but it is a risk you want to minimize, because if he goes off somewhere else and he's the only guy who knows how to set it up, it's now a reverse engineering problem. And in general, it's just a more pleasant work environment when everything just works, right? So client side and dev side, right? Customer side, user facing side, and developer facing. So what is the ideal solution to this? So you're a developer in a web agency, you've got all kinds of different projects depending on different clients who want different things worked on, legacy projects, new projects, web apps, brochureware, kind of, content management-y sites, right? You might have some more technical things, something might be in .NET, something might be in LAMP, right? All that kind of thing. So the ideal solution to this is you want a one-click, right? So the dev just sits down, presses one button, the thing loads up. Now, ideally, I like to see one a zero-click. He should already have it running when he sits down in the chair, right? That some companies which are running quite well do actually have that. And you want the devs to be able to code within minutes, right? Now, obviously, the devs won't code within minutes, depending on what it is. If they're given their first task and it's like change this green to a blue, yeah, they might be able to code that within a few minutes. But the point is, they can in a particular scenario. But if they're spending the first day just setting it up, that's a lag time. So the ideal solution would also have easy production parity. So if the new dev sat down and he's got the code running, but all these images on the live site are just on the live site, not on his machine, so it just looks like all these missing images. It just doesn't have the right, it's just not that good. So you want easy ways to match it with what production looks like. And also you want minimum cost to implement, right? Every engineer wants to go in and build a solution. I'm going to make the, what's that famous XKCD comic, 13 competing solutions. I'll make one which unifies them all, now you have 14 competing solutions. So they all want to do that, but if something already exists, you want to use that, because you should be focused on what your team's value add is, right? You shouldn't be focused on just building tools. So based on my experience, typical solutions are pretty varied, because it is a problem and people do try to solve it. The basic one, which you can get away with, especially if you're not in a highly dynamic environment, if you've just been working in one division of a company on one project for a long period of time, it's all running on your machine, you don't need to worry too much about this kind of stuff, and you can get away with just having it running natively in some cases, depending on what it is. Other languages, for instance, Python likes to do things with virtual env, so you get a bit of isolation to try and isolate all these different projects and environments from each other. But the next thing people think is, well, we're going to containerize it, right? We're going to use VMs. I've seen that used. That can be effective, but it's too heavy if you've got like 6 different projects running at once. So then people go to Docker and Docker Compose and related templates and things like that. So they all try and set it up from scratch. They all do it their own different ways. And then they write scripts around it. And every team does it differently. You've got no unification. So, and based on experience, I heard people grimace at the word Docker. So people thought it's just going to be this panacea, but especially the junior devs, they know there's always things you've got to debug when you're doing it yourself from scratch for the first time in a lot of cases for some people. So Lando tries to jump into this and just make it easy, right? Trying to solve this as quickly and as easily as possible. The idea is to be able to spin up local development environments for multiple different projects all at the same time as easily as possible, and creating that setup configuration as quickly as possible. Which, when it solves this, it removes this source of friction in development teams. So yes, it is named after the Star Wars character, and that's the website for it. You can check that out. So it's actively developed, open source, very important. You never just jump in and use somebody's library only to find out that they abandoned it, and now you got a problem. So it's actively developed. I checked out the governance of it. The guy who's writing it's pretty passionate about it. And he's pushing releases every 2 weeks, and he's got some maintainers supporting him. So yeah, it's available for the main OSs. Its dependency is just Docker, basically. And yeah, in addition to the active development of it as active marketing efforts, they actually want it to kind of become pretty popular. And in my experience, it standardizes and streamlines about 90% of the problems that I've seen typically crop up around this. And it sort of solves a lot of the periphery problems as well, which I'll discuss. All right, so what are the features? Fundamentally, it's trying to change kind of from configure everything to assumptive, right? So it's trying to go with sensible defaults instead of your typical massive Docker compose YAMLs, and then the next thing you think is, well, let's boilerplate it, right? That kind of stuff. So that kind of massive file thing is not particularly eloquent, right? So what it does is it goes with sensible defaults, and then you can override it down to the Docker compose level. And it's trying to make it as fast and simple as possible. So this is an example of the configuration file it uses. What it does with this is it says recipe, right, meaning like boilerplate, is we want Drupal, so that's LAMP based, so it will say, all right, I need a PHP Apache container and a MySQL container, and I need whatever tooling comes with Drupal to be installed in there. It uses standard directories to set it all up, standard networking and everything, and it just does it all for you. It just does it all for you. If you need to then customize stuff, you can. So yeah, like I said, these recipes are like boilerplates. They're available for a wide array of languages and frameworks, everything from .NET to Java to PHP, and different types of popular frameworks on top of that, like WordPress and so on. So you can see here, this is basically all it takes to set up a running, contained LAMP stack WordPress environment with a boilerplate code in there ready to go. So that's all you take, you just run that. So it can be very efficient. So a big problem if you're running multiple projects on the same machine can be, well, you have to switch them on and off if they all want to use port 80. So what you want is, you want it to proxy that for you. So what Lando does is, for any given container it spins up, which is going to use port 80 or port 443, it will give that its own ports, right, which it will assign for it. It will pick it for it, and then it will use all those and connect them into Trafic. That's what it uses for its local proxying. And then for you, it's as simple as just saying, I want to access my Apache container via this. And that's all you have to do. You can have them all running at the same time. So when you're spinning up your Docker containers for a project, there can be steps you need to run each time it starts up. You might have pulled code and your package, JSON file, there's something new in there or whatever, or you're just starting it for the first time. You don't have to rebuild the Docker containers every time. You can just say, I want this when it starts, or before it starts, or after it starts, or various stages of the startup process. It also has a bunch of tools around handling global scope. So instead of having to inside your Docker file, apt update, apt install, you can just say it's a node. Globals, I want gob CI latest. Okay, that I don't like. I like to lock versions. All right, because you get problems otherwise. But so that's an example of that. Now, as a LAMP guy, it also handles Xdebug, which is super handy. You don't have to do any setup. You just say yes, I want Xdebug, and within the container, you have all these environment variables available. So, for instance, inside whatever your app is doing, it can know things like a variety of things, whether its root is whatever domain it's running on. You can use all that kind of stuff. All right, cool. All right, so you also, when you're working with Docker containers, a lot of the times you have to do stuff inside the Docker container, so you've got to keep going in and out and doing this kind of stuff. So it handles that too with something called tooling. Tooling is basically it's like kind of like a script. you just say, when I go Lando and then this is the name of my tool, it will execute the given commands in the given container, which is super handy. And if you want to just go in directly, it's as simple as Lando SSH. You don't have to do an ugly Docker command, right? You just Lando SSH, and if you want to pick that goes to the default container. If you want to go to a different one, you just specify. Also handles your SSL for you, so you've got your HTTPS. And you don't have to Docker PS, and it shows all your containers, and you've got to work out which one's related to the project you're in. You just go Lando info, and it will just Lando list, and it will list the containers related to the current project only. Also handles all internal networking for you, gives each container a logical host name, so you can just talk to each of them, right? Get them to talk to each other, no problem. You don't have to set any networking up yourself. And you can even talk to containers in other projects, which doesn't sound like a good idea, but it's an option. This is quite handy too. If you've got your local web app running and you just want to quickly show somebody else, okay, you want to check this out, without having to deploy to anything, you just go Lando share, and then they can access through the internet the web server running on your machine. So that can be pretty quick and handy. Just Lando share, bang, okay, finished, and then close it. Now, a lot of the time you have to export and import to databases. Now, if you've got to do that directly in Docker containers, it can be a bit, it's not the smoothest operation in the world, right? But with Lando, they make it super simple, just Lando DB Export. So because Lando's always going with sensible defaults, you have kind of like your base database, and by default it will assume that. So in a lot of apps, you just have one database, and that's sufficient. So in those cases, you have sensible defaults, but you can also have more databases, and you can specify them. You want to import to SQL GZ, then you just DB import. That's simple. It will take it, put it in the within the container. It will do the required MySQL kind of import, or whatever database you're using. All right, so those are the main features. They're not everything, but they are certainly a very solid base. Typical things I liked to do after that was to add downloading live assets from the server, downloading the live database, right? You're trying to debug a live database. Somebody's put some weird content in it that's broken something because someone forgot to escape something or whatever. You can pull it. Health check or tests, you can wrap around it so that when it starts up, all right, you can check if it passes some tests so you know it's actually healthy, so it's still working. That's quite good for project governance. So if you've got a project, you should always have some guy who's kind of the buck stops here guy, so that someone's ultimately responsible for if it breaks. So with this, it applies even to local development environment setup. So you can tell, for instance, with nightly tests by running this, the local development environment doesn't work. Then you can say to him, please fix that, because if it's always in working condition, for certain when a new developer joins that project, it will work like that. So you can kind of apply continuous testing to the local development environment. So that's pretty handy. And project-specific tooling, of course. So in my experience, it's been pretty effective at solving costly inefficiencies in inducting devs into teams, or inducting devs onto new projects. And like I just mentioned, it improves development governance. It's definitely more effective in workplaces where there's a lot of varying kind of multiple projects of different types, which all need different environments, and people have to work on maybe more than one in a given day. And it's certainly been reliable, and it doesn't take much to set up. And it avoids wasting time on building tools when you could be building features. So, thank you for listening. Any questions?
Can you, when you have your local dev environment, can you export that as Docker image to deployments? Is there a way to do that through Lando, or you have to do it manually?
Not really. You don't have to do that. You just have that. That's it. That's it. So then the dependency is Lando. So what you're saying is, how do you export that environment to live? So for parity, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay, right. I misunderstood. Yeah, you can make it like that. You can specify, for instance, a custom image, and then you can actually go that route. That is an option. Generally, this has been most useful for legacy projects which don't have anything, because you just got to get up and running quickly. But in terms of parity, yeah, you can go down that route. You can dial it in that direction. Yeah, but it's not designed for strict parity out of the box. It's more designed for speed, and then you can move that direction if you want. Yeah.
Does it play nice with Git as well? I guess for versioning your different recipes and everything, you basically can Git everything and share that through your repository across the team, for example.
Yeah, it's just a YAML
everything
file.
is YAML, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
just a YAML file. So yeah, it's pretty handy.
Does it use shared, like a shared mounted drive? Like if you have let's say you want to develop a WordPress application, you want to use your local file system for the code base, or is it all launch it in the containers itself? How does that work?
Yeah, that's kind of like its linking point. So the directory, the YAML, the Lando YAML file is in.
Yeah.
That's shared, right? That's automatically shared between the two. It also shares a couple of other ones which you might find useful. It thinks, for instance, the user directory, because there's been cases where like you need to use like an SSH key in your user directory inside the container or something like that, and you can specify other directories to share as well. But yeah, by default, everything is focused around the repo directory. Yes. Yeah. All right.
How long does this solution exist? Because I've never heard about it.
Yeah, it's strange. It's actually been going for a while, but he's like really what's the word? He doesn't want to release it. He's kind of tentative about releasing it to the real release. He went through like beta for ages, and now he's in release candidate for ages. But it works fine. But he just wants to get it like perfect until he releases it, which I think is a good attitude. But it's been around a while. I think. Tooth, maybe 3 years, I think, just off the top of my head, but don't quote me on that one. But yeah.
In what language is it implemented? I mean, how is it implemented? Is it on top of any other stack?
That's a good question. I think it was JavaScript. Last I checked, I think it was, but don't quote me on that either. But yeah, it's fundamentally, it's wrapping around Docker Compose. That's my understanding. So it's kind of, I think it's JavaScript wrapping around Docker Compose.
Because for installing Lambda, you need to have npm and JavaScript installed already. So that's what I mean. Bootstrap process. What would be the standard?
They release it. They release it as just a package, right? So they're just releasing it. Like for instance, Windows is a. I think it's just an exe, and then.
I see.
Mac is, I don't use Mac, their version of that.
Yeah.
And then of course Linux is a deb. So yeah, it's there's multiple different releases, but normally I haven't had to build it from source yet. Haven't used it on any other strange operating systems yet. So.
Okay. Does it have any quirks for running on Mac and Windows? Because I know that Docker.
Yeah, the quirk is that people don't like Windows sometimes. So what happens is they'll write some scripts wrapped around it, which are for bash, and then so that's what I found. But they run basically the same. So the difference is just how you install Docker on the different systems, because the way you install Lando is just the same. You have that operating system's version of a binary like package thing, and they just run that. But yeah, I had one case where, because everybody was using Linux and Mac, and then we had somebody use Windows join the team. And then, yeah, the problem was people had written some scripts outside it, and they just hadn't designed it to put it inside the Lando containers. That was the only thing. people not using it properly. Yeah, but I didn't see any glitches. All right, thanks very much.